All right. Good afternoon or good evening. This is Steve Mazzacane. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. We just have to get my name on the bottom of the screen at some point. But we are here. It is May 15th. The reason I'm giving you the date, not all these things are time sensitive, but I want to start off with talking about just briefly. Last weekend, if you listened to our last podcast, we talked about the Legacy Theater and the show on the 60s and 70s music at the theater. I want to make sure I promote that. They're a nonprofit, so this is not like a paid thing, but I did see it. It's the last weekend. It's vital that we support local theater. And here's the deal. This show is pretty good. I had a good time. The entertainers are phenomenal. They get on a small show, basically a huge band, piano, all that stuff, and it's really impressive. So if you get a chance over the weekend, tonight's Thursday, but Friday, Saturday, and then the last one on Sunday afternoon, head down to Legacy, grab a seat, and have a really good time there. We appreciate them supporting us, and we want to make sure we support them as well. But we are here today with Brantford First Selectman Jamie Cosgrove. We're here because, Jamie, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course. You just announced, we would have you on no matter what because you're the first selectman of Brantford, but you just announced you're not running again after 12 years. So we'll talk a lot about the last 12 years. We'll talk about what's happening this year. We just had a meeting the other night on Brantford's budget. Most of my readers are aware of me going off on some things that happened there, so I do want to talk a little bit about that. But I also want to talk about your time in running for office and what you've accomplished, and I think it's pretty substantial. Now, I have to just say this, as most people, there's no really, this is a conversation. I don't pretend to be all objective in this. I have supported you because I think you've done a really good job, and our town has benefited from you being in office. So
thank you.
I'm not happy about you leaving. We'll talk after about popping some tires or something to make sure you have to stay in office. But let's talk about, before we get into your 12 years in office, talk about the budget. On Tuesday, the budget passed in Brantford of about $141 million. There was some controversy over a move by the Democrats to remove money from the actual budget, from the contingency line in the budget. What are your thoughts on that and what impacts that may have?
Yeah, I think the removal of the $500,000 from contingency, which Brantford every year carries a contingency line item, and for the audience, it's not just a contingency as in terms of we don't know what we may need those dollars for. We kind of identify unsettled contracts, storm events that may occur. There's a whole host of things that kind of go in to make up that develop that number contingency. It's not just a number pulled out of the air. It's not just to tax for. It's to be prudent in knowing in the span of a year, many things can happen that are unanticipated and therefore unbudgeted. Mm-hmm. So, to have that in there, and this year was just shy of $1 million in that contingency line item, and to have that reduced, I think, unfortunately, was not the best thing for Brantford. It really is not significant in terms of the impact it's going to have on the overall budget. It's not going to. I think we went from a 21.49 mill rate to a 21.40, so less than a tenth of a
so
mil
you're not
difference.
Changing much in taxes.
So really, what that means for the average taxpayer, they're not going to see any significant adjustment. We know we're in a challenging year because of the reval, and so for individual taxpayers, the residential taxpayers, based on the increased value that they're going to see, there's a shift that's occurring, right? There's a shift that's occurring in our grand list. It's shifting over to the residential properties, and we were cognizant of that, and we were concerned about that shift occurring. We brought it up over a year ago, and since that first time bringing it up, we often referenced what can we do to kind of try to mitigate that shift. You're not going to be able to. We always said you're never going to budget your way out of that, but you may recall the Board of Finance back in, and by the way, which the RTM supported in their following meeting, but going back to February for this budget year, really in February we did a number of things to really try to help this year's budget, right? And that continued on through the budget process, really to to have like a 2% increase, really the tax levy, because you're going through a reval year, so you can't compare mill rate to mill rate.
That's true.
So you really have to look at. So there was going to always be a reduction. We knew it in the mill rate, but what we were doing is really trying to control what we needed to collect through taxation, and to kind of get that around the 2% number. If in comparison to what other towns are seeing in their tax levy increase this year, was I think something that Brantford worked hard to do. We were fortunate that we had opportunities to kind of to exercise certain moves to kind of mitigate the increase in the tax levy, meaning that what we need to raise through taxation. So when somebody gets their property tax bill and they see a large increase, that is not due to increase in spending. That is really due to the shift in the value, the increase in value of the residential property. The $500,000 that they voted to remove from the contingency, like I said, just taking it out and cutting it just for, I guess just for to say that they did some kind of cut. I really can't explain why they would do that. Like I said, isn't going to really have a significant impact either way. All right. And we will get through this. It does make things a little bit more challenging for next year for the budget, because now you not only need to replace those dollars. Yeah. We have what normally makes up, I mentioned before about unsettled contracts. Well, next year we're going to have a far greater number of unsettled contracts that we have to plan for in the budget than we did this year. That's just one item that makes it. So you're going to have to restore those dollars, and so now you're building off a smaller base. That'll have an impact. But what was most concerning to me at the budget night is a few statements that were made, and they said that this was a move in the right direction, and and I got to be honest with that. This is not a move in the right direction. We've seen this story play out in other communities, and I'm not going to name communities.
In a lot of communities, yes, no question.
And so with this constant, we should be reducing fund balance, and then now making these cuts such as this. This is not the right direction. So if that's what one feels that we should be doing, I can tell you we've seen this story play out in other communities.
No, I've written about Hamden. We're looking at New Haven, letting off almost 200 teachers. This idea that Brantford saves too much money is the one that's most disconcerting to me. So they got up at the meeting and said, we need to start cutting this. What's funny is last year they sent a letter to the Board of Finance saying, can you add more money from the – now, the Board of Finance did not listen to them. That's not where they get their information from. Board of Finance looks at things in a larger window, 3, 4, 5 years out. So it's not like that letter was effective, but the Board of Finance does always move money from savings into this. So it's not like it was zero. This year I think it's $6 million. So they said we need $500,000 makes no sense. So 6.4 is already coming over from savings. But what I'm lost on is if you're claiming that you were successful last year telling the Board of Finance, now it's not true, but this is their claim, then why do this? What their thought process is remove $500,000 from the actual budget, so you force the Board of Finance to move savings into this. It seems crazy to me. I don't know the concept of we're saving too much money. Like I wrote earlier today that's like saying there's too much bacon. Like I don't think that's a thing. Like if you're saving too much money, especially being a shoreline town. But to get up and say that and say, hey, we're going to force the Board of Finance's hand by removing from the actual budget, it has like Trump qualities to me. This is like branches of government not knowing their role. Yeah,
and the RTM control has the controls expenditures. That's their purview. So when they cut a contingency on it, which is that money cannot be restored.
No.
At this point. So that's to bring, and I know they're advocating for more beyond the 6.4 million, which quite honestly, the 6.4 million that we brought forward, we did that, as I said, once again, to try to bring down what was needed to be raised through taxation to kind of help the taxpayer that's going to see an increase due solely to the value of their property. So, but that's not sustainable in terms of to continue. So we're going to have to start dialing that back at some point, what we draw, and that therefore will have an impact on future budgets.
Yes.
So, it's a one-time, money brought forward. We have other challenges, not challenges. We know what is on the horizon. When we talk about the growth of fund balance, well, many communities across the country in the last several years, really since ARPA dollars and things like, saw an increase in fund balance.
Yep.
That's you saw that that's across the nation. So the fact that Branford's fund balance grew, maybe at a faster rate than maybe it has in the past, is not unique to Branford. Other communities have seen growth in their fund balance.
And just to be clear, when we say fund balance, essentially, for layman's terms, the savings we have, the money we have on hand.
Yeah. Right. So, to have that money, at our, that we have that available will serve us well for future, whether there's projects, unseen events, not having to go to the market. It's something that other communities strive for.
Yeah.
When I talk to my colleagues in other towns, they say, how do you accumulate that fund balance? They want to know. And, one of the things is it's like, well, we've, fully fund unfunded positions. We're conservative with our revenue estimates, and we budget contingency.
Yeah.
Other communities are looking to increase. I haven't had one community said, you should bring that down and be like us.
That's absurd, yeah.
So...
Well, that's and we talked about this before, but in the past, we've watched people on Branford, the Democratic side, stand and put up a sign that says, well, Branford has, $40 million in savings, and other towns only have 5 or 6, so therefore Branford's saving too much money. And instead, smart people are saying, well, wait a minute. And those other towns are saying, wait, we want to save more money too. Like, we are in much better shape, not just... I know people don't always understand this, but to give an example, suppose we filed or we pass new fields for $10 million, and the interest rate on that is 4%. Well, we can have the ability to pay cash temporarily at 0% and wait till those interest rates drop, which we know is happening this year, for example. Like, we know the Fed is going to drop interest rates, which will impact. So millions of dollars have been saved because we have this savings account.
Right.
And I don't know if... it's very simple to get up and say we're saving too much money, it's overtaxation. But ultimately, you save the taxpayers a fortune. Never mind the fact that our mill rate is now 21.5.
Right.
No one has that.
Yeah. A couple things there. I just want to address. You raised some good points. Yeah. The claim that, we're overtaxed. Listen, any community, you hear people that, are concerned about taxes, right? But if you look at Branford's mill rate in comparison to other communities, for the level of services and programs, I think that's important to note that we provide, because there's a number of services that we provide here in Branford that you may not find in another community. But when you take everything into consideration of what we offer here as a community, I think we have a very competitive mill rate. With the reval, obviously it came back down. But even prior to the reval, I think we had, for the level of services that we provided, the programs, the facilities that we have, I think our mill rate was pretty competitive.
Well, if we compare apples to apples, Hamden's going through their reval.
Right.
They're at 44 after the reval. We're at 21.5. So I think that tells you what you need to know about management. To have a town that has this much saved, set aside, a shoreline town, which those challenges, that mill rate at what it's at is just, I don't know a town that would not look at Branford and say, I want to be Branford.
The other thing, Steve, that you touched upon was when we have to go to the market,
Yeah.
right? We have these projects. So I think, most in the community probably realize or recognize that we just completed a number of projects. The largest project that the town has ever undertaken in terms of cost was the Walsh Intermediate School project. We got about a little over maybe 35% reimbursement on that project.
From the state.
From the state of Connecticut, which is low compared to others. But we were able, because of the fund balance that we have, we were able to essentially just bond what our share was going to be. So, and kind of wait for the reimbursement from the state to come in. If you didn't have that healthy fund balance for cash flow purposes, we would have had to bond more in order to wait because we're still waiting for some money to come in from the state, but we can essentially float that because we have cash on hand.
So realistically, like if we had to bond $90 million instead of 60,
that would have an impact.
That would have, and that's at 3.5% or 4%. Right. That extra $30 million, we're talking about a good amount of money. An extra million.
Yeah, and it's
not the exact numbers,
right? Because they do make progress payments through the project, but you get to a point where they hold back to their final audit. So still, even that amount, we didn't have to bond for. We have money aside where we could cover those projects.
I don't think. Certainly Tuesday night at the meeting, there were people who did not fully understand that. And they were voting for this, not realizing that the money we have on hand has saved us so much money. Mm-hmm. And listen, this is not different than your home. Like if you go to buy something for your home and you have no cash, you have to put on the credit card, you have to pay for it. If you have the money in cash, you may bond it later on, you may finance it later on, but you can pay at 0% early on. So I don't know why this is an issue. I understand the political thing. I understand people want to get up and say, hey, we saved you money, we cut taxes. But you cut taxes a penny and you caused more issues, quite frankly, for next year. And
I think it's just a bad precedent. And the fact what was most concerning is that those who are the proponents of this then champion that this is the right path.
It's not.
When it's not.
No, it's not. And I've never seen, in the 12 years you've been there, even before that, I don't think we've ever seen anybody try to take from contingency before.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to this extent. I think,
we transferred small amounts for an item,
some cuts, but not just to, not to this extent of what was put forward.
Okay. Well, hopefully whoever's next will be able to adjust a little bit. And listen, we have Joe Mooney. Right now we have Jim Finch. Mm-hmm. To people who don't know this, the head of our Board of Finance was the head of the state's tax collection agency. This guy knows what he's doing. Like, this is not a joke. What killed me about the Democrats is, why are you not listening to him? Like, even if you don't like Republicans, and I don't want to listen to any Republican, I won't listen to Jamie, won't listen to whatever, and I realize I'm a Democrat, they don't want to listen to me. I get that. But the highest ranking guy in this town, the head of the Board of Finance, is a Democrat who was appointed by Lamont to serve in this capacity, who knows finance, and none of them go to him. And they're listening to people who don't know what they're talking about.
I don't get it either. I mean, but, and you're right. I mean, both Jim Finch, Joe Mooney, we're fortunate to have them here. Again, I think they have truly embedded or established this, culture of fiscal responsibility, which, which I'm concerned about with such actions like this. But again, through their leadership, their presence, and their knowledge has really established that. But it's not only are they not listening to them, our fiscal management, our practices have been commented on by Standard & Poor's, right? Yeah. So you have a third-party rating agency who's coming out and they're remarking on our ability. So they're not listening to even
it doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me. Okay, so you announced a few weeks ago that you're not running again. Let's go back 12 years. Now, I first met you when you were on the RTM. I did not know you before that. You decide to run for office. What made you decide to run for office 12 years ago?
Well, for the RTM?
You were already on the RTM, but when you ran for first selectman.
Well, it happened. I served one term on and then 1 year the Board of Selectmen. I think I need to go back to to the really getting involved on the RTM level. And I recall at that time, there were a number of issues going on, but you may recall the Tabor issue. And that was kind of languishing on, I felt, much longer than it needed to be. I felt that the town wasn't moving forward with a number of things that we could be moving forward. And it really, it spanned a few administrations over the year. It was several years, and I remember the first meeting that I probably attended, a Board of Selectmen's meeting. That was the comment that I made at that time was like, we should be looking to resolve this and settle it. So for the benefit of the town, so we can move forward, kind of put this behind us. From that meeting, and there was a couple other meetings kind of spoke on that issue. I was asked to run on the RTM, and on my time at the RTM, again, I always try to focus on what was best for the town and moving things forward. I wanted to see things happen here in town, and then there was a candidate. I was asked to run it for a selectman seat, which then I was fortunate to get the votes, and I sat on the board for a term. And when it came time to, hey, how about first selectman? I just thought, well, you know what? There is still a number of things. There's a senior center, the Walsh Intermediate School. There were a few other projects, and again, I just kind of wanted to keep moving the town forward, and so that's why I put my hat in the ring and decided to run.
Yeah, at that time we had a couple. So the firehouse got done, but the firehouse getting done on the public works property forced that to move.
Right.
Then there was, what do we do at Tabor? There was talks about throwing public works at Tabor, which is still a bad idea. Right. And then there was also the concept of the senior center swap, where we wanted to give one town building to a family and put it down on Route 1. Yeah. And these all kind of, I would say poorly managed. The firehouse is done and it's beautiful and it's effective, but there was some process issues with all of these projects.
Yeah. And again, even for my ultimate decision why I wanted to run, there was projects there that I wanted to see happen, but I really wanted, I was I am a lifelong resident of Branford, and I feel strongly, there's always concern about change and what that may bring in terms of the character of a town, and this was a town that I was now beginning to raise my family, and at the time I had a couple of young girls. I knew it required the right balance. And that's really, it's not, you got to kind of mix some progress, some development, some moving forward with projects while still focused on kind of, keeping what people, love about the community, what makes it a strong, vibrant community, and that's really what it was. Really, it was really for I wanted to keep Branford, what I loved about Branford, the town, but I knew that also requires progress in order to keep it. I think Branford has always been that type of town, which draws people, which has drawn people here, which people establish roots here. And want to stay here and get involved in the community.
So your first project you undertook was the senior center. I remember you hired Sandra Vlock to do a study to look at that. It's funny, when I think now, I was obviously involved in all of those meetings or covered all those meetings and look at projects now, it seems like that was far more complicated. It was almost like the residents had to learn to trust you early on. Talk about that project and how that got to fruition.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we hired Vlock to undertake essentially a feasibility study to look at what model. There was a lot of discussion in terms of not only where a new senior center should be located, but what would be the model. Would it be just a standalone building? Would it be an intergenerational building? And what I really wanted to do, and which I think I've done with Project Sense, is really kind of let's lay out a process and kind of how are we going to get to our decisions, and those decisions are justified by the process that we went through. So through that process, we engaged the community. We engaged other communities, kind of looked at what worked in their communities. We engaged not only the state, the users, but the community as a whole. We try to really do a broad reach and really evaluate it, kind of what is the best model. there was, again, going into that, there were a lot of ideas. There was, proponents of certain models that ultimately didn't get selected. But what I was most proud of the process was a number of individuals or small groups, that kind of had organized and were really championing certain, models or locations. When we went through the process and they saw why the recommendation, which we ultimately ended up doing, renovating, expanding the community house, and what that meant in terms of not only a facility but programs and availability. A large amount of people who were first kind of came over and accepted that.
So they weren't for it initially, and then once they saw the process.
And then, once they saw, well, what would this mean? What would this look like? They kind of said, all right. And again, because we went through that process too, and we got the input, and they saw how this new model would not only provide them the seniors, the facilities that they needed but we then have the ability to expand programs, service, hours of service, right? That building's open on the weekends. People are looking for even a place to socialize beyond just the organized programs. That's what we found from the senior community. And, I'm proud to say, I think we built a facility that will accommodate that. I think the transition that you've been seeing, the community has been seeing, is getting to that.
Yeah. Especially facility. The last 6 months or a year or so. But yes.
Yeah.
I remember the senior swap, and the senior swap came to us basically fully formed. There were no public hearings. It was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give this building to this people or take this building, whatever. And then it went to the public, and there was mass hysteria. There was for some reason, it went to the RTM before the Board of Finance, and there was arguments there, and then it went to the Board of Finance, and they said, get rid of this. This is not going to work. So you coming in with a different plan was basically saying, okay, let's go to the public first. Let's have all these meetings first and get support for it. And I think it resulted in, nobody was ever going to get rid of that building. Mm-hmm. So that building was decrepit and falling apart in many ways, but we weren't going to get rid of it, so you might as well use it. And then by combining two, now this does bring up a question. Why do we still have Canoe Brook? like at some point, the senior center moved over. Is that going to be sold at some point? Is there a plan?
Yeah, so, we have used that, and we are currently using that for
the police are there, right?
For some temporary storage. So we used it for the animal shelter during their project, that swing space. But yes, it's not a building that we want to continue to hold on to. I think once this fall, we'll be looking to probably repurpose that building. Yeah, once they're done.
It's in bad shape. There's no question.
So we're actually looking at kind of we'll probably be issuing soon an RFP to kind of get proposals. What would the future of that building be?
And now the next one was, we had parents going to meetings for a while about Walsh being this open floor plan. And I remember hearing this concept of an open floor plan. I didn't really know what it meant. And then we're at a Board of Ed meeting, and they said, let's tour it. And I had never seen anything like it. Literally, it was an open space. It looked like an open cafeteria. And teachers had taken bookshelves and chairs and just stuff and stacked it up to create walls. I've never seen, apparently in the 70s, this was all the rage to have this open floor plan. And I think we saw, and I think you knew, parents were getting their kids to that age and then leaving, going to private schools because the school was something nobody wanted to go to. But that was a massive undertaking. Yeah.
It was that was a project that was discussed and for many years. I think needed to do something. Mm-hmm. And again, prior to my taking office in 2013, the Board of Ed did look at a plan. They came forward with it was a kind of a single plan. This is a concept and basically just trying to repurpose the existing building. But that came at a price tag of $120 million, and our reimbursement would only have been 11.
Was that what the number?
11% reimbursement, because we would have been penalized for the size of the building and trying to repurpose all that space. So, that would have cost us over $100 million. And so the Board of Finance said, let's take a pause. That's when they charged finance director to kind of, hey, really do a debt impact study or analysis, kind of how much debt can we assume. Jim prepared that analysis. I had taken office at that time. I then engaged a firm to do once again a feasibility study, looking at 3 or 4 models of what can we do to address the needs of for the middle school, and kind of give us a budget number, a cost estimate, and what our projected reimbursement. And that's when the town supported the current model that we did, which was like a hybrid model. We essentially saved the bulk areas, repurposed them. The cafetorium became just a auditorium. It's a beautiful space.
Yeah, it really is.
We were able to save the pool. The auxiliary gym, those are things. A pool and the auxiliary gym we would never be allowed to build in a new school, at the middle school level, and get reimbursement. But we were able to, keep those, and we renovated those spaces, and then built the whole academic area.
It's interesting as we talk about the process when it comes to taxes and the budget. Even before we get to building this thing or the plans for this thing, there's serious data looked at on long-term financing for it. Mm-hmm. Like there's planning for this is what the Board of Finance does that most people don't realize, is you're not looking at it what taxes are next year. You're looking at it, or what are taxes for the next 10, 15 years, the length of this bonding. And so that's this idea of keeping your tax increases every year to that 1% to 2% requires long-term planning. Sure. And I think that's the result of having money in the bank and being able to, and having the name that keeps coming up is Jim. I mean, Jim Finch has been amazing and making, not just here, but also previously in DeRoss's administration. Right. The guy does just an amazing job doing this stuff.
And, with all these projects, right, our debt service, meaning to pay for these projects, both the interest and principal, is roughly, let's just say, call it 8% of the budget. Okay. All right. So I think that's important because people see these projects, they see these are large numbers, and it's like, how are those going to, impact our taxes? And really, when it's like 8 cents on the dollar is going towards these capital projects. So the school, the senior center, the firehouse. All that is done, and we try to stay within that range, and we've managed it. In primary, large part to Jim. Looking at it, so we avoid those spikes in the not only in debt service, but if we avoid the spikes in debt service, then it avoids a spike in the taxes. Yeah. Right. So to try to flat that, so we do a lot of planning.
Well, that's we talk about Trump all the time, and certainly whether you're a Trump supporter or not, you have to acknowledge that. The things he does cause huge reactions up or down in the stock market, huge reactions in all this kind of stuff. And we're the opposite of that. Uh-huh. We want consistency long term. We want taxpayers to be able to know, okay, look, you can build it. Yes, we're going to pay our teachers their 2% raise and our police and our fire and what have you. And that's built in. But those are consistent tax increases. There's not 6%, 2%, 6%.
Yeah, I think you need to build people want stability. Yeah. People want stability in their lives. The businesses want stability if they're going to go invest somewhere, and you do that by trying to, kind of moderate the swings in the taxes.
I can't go too much further without talking about my favorite project you've ever done. And it's tough because you really didn't do it because it's not a town department. But you know how much I hated that Blackstone Library project. I hated that project. I remember talking to you on the phone about it, just screaming, like, what the hell is this? Now, what people don't always understand is this. The Blackstone predates the town charter. Mm-hmm. So the Blackstone is not actually a town project. So they come to us for money, and but they hire their people, and they manage it themselves. It's not a town project. So the town library, I think Willoughby Wallace is more of a town library because it's actually on the town budget than Blackstone Library is. So, but the Blackstone killed me because the Blackstone was only $5 million. So compared to everything else, but it drove me I mean, I wrote 10 articles about it, and it was just brutal. I had people from the Blackstone were like, "Can we take you to dinner and convince you that this?" I'm like, "Listen, like I hate this project for a lot of reasons because I felt like there was a lot more wants than needs in that. For some reason, the library had moved the children's room to the third floor. I'm like, what the hell would you do that for? So now we got to fix your problem. So I remember, and I know, and maybe I shouldn't have yelled at you the way I yelled at you at the time because it wasn't, for $5 million, get on the project that they needed. I get it now. Maybe I've taken a few years to calm down on that, but that got done. And then the animal shelter got done with your grandfather's name on it. And so it was an amazing. What other projects? Am I missing something? The Indian Neck Firehouse.
Yeah.
What else?
Indian Neck Firehouse, the animal shelter, senior center, school.
I think those are the main.
Those are the big ones. But I will just say the Blackstone.
Go ahead.
All right, because I got to. The one thing I understand what you felt that there were some wants in there more than needs, but in terms of addressing what the primary focus of that project was kind of bringing down the children's bathroom, new bathrooms and entrance, accessible entrance, which I think were needed. I didn't think it made sense that they were up there to begin with. That was something, but I think that was all needed. The one thing that building is certainly a jewel of the community.
No question, it's a treasure.
And I think
no question.
And the one thing that I was would never want to see is that that the quality of work and materials that they would use would be less than what was needed. So, in terms of that. What they built and the construction that they did, I think it was warranted in terms of to maintain the integrity of the building. There's a cost to that.
Yeah, and it's a historical building, and I get that. And, but there were arguments that were made that just, I think we lost again, not you, because it was the Blackstone making that argument, but this idea that, we need meeting space in the Blackstone Library. Well, the town has a ton of meeting space. Like, we didn't really, these are arguments that you're making because you saw a drawing you really liked. I'm just, pontificating here because I really hated that project. But, and listen, people can go look up articles that I wrote detailing why. I don't know if they can have that website still around. But in any event, that was the one that always just drove me crazy.
But, and I just found when you're asking about the projects, and certainly the town has undertaken a number of projects. And also, I mean, there's been, stuff that maybe aren't as visible as a building going up, but we've, I think we've done a very aggressive sidewalk installation program. We've done, but a lot of the smaller projects, just improving our parks and throughout town and building some parks, right? We took down Branford Hill School. Mm-hmm. That was an area that was underparked. What was the purpose of that? And we kind of repurposed that area for the for the town as a whole, but primarily that if you think about sections of areas of town, neighborhoods of town, Branford Hills didn't have a park prior to that. So I think it brought something to that neighborhood, that area. But I tell others that are kind of just maybe newly elected officials when we're talking, I was like, oftentimes to the residents of your town, the small projects mean a lot, is just as much as the large projects.
So we have new playgrounds pretty much everywhere, right? So
I think they just finished the last of the park.
At Vets.
At Vets, yep. We just did that it just opened up this month. But yes, I mean, and a number of parks like throughout, or small little pocket parks, or we've improved the trail system, the Shoreline Greenway Trail, which that was a project that was also kind of having trouble, finding a location where they could build the first section.
Oh yeah, where the labyrinth is now. We added a whole section.
So
in there.
I remember, talking to at the time, Judy Miller, Jack Wood. They were the strong proponents, and others on the team. But I said, I think we just need to build it somewhere, and then so people can see the value of it, right? Because they were trying other sections. So we all agreed to let's move that section to the Tabor property. And I could tell you that's been it
huge hit.
opened up,
Yeah.
Chet's Pond,
It's
which,
beautiful, yeah.
I mean, the rec department just did a fishing derby. They do
I
it
saw
down
that.
every year. It's stocked every year. The Bill Ludwig approached
The
me
Labyrinth.
about doing the Labyrinth, which, many people in the community use. It's a great, find. And Public Works, I mean, they've really expanded the trail system through that property. So, I mean, really, you can go down that property and you can do a connection, basically, from the Shoreline Greenway Trail up all the way up to Ecology Park, which is the whole, and you have beautiful views there. Come down and loop that whole. It's over 100 and some acres, the total.
What is just to talk about some upcoming stuff, we have the Town Green project, the Town Center project. What is the status of that?
Yeah, so unfortunately they had an issue with the bids. So that is, unfortunately, it's probably, looks like it may have to be rebid.
Okay.
Because of some errors that occurred or informalities.
In the bidding process?
In the bidding process with the low bidder, and that kind of created a whole,
So one of the secondary bidders is challenging the low bid, and so
in the low bid, and just with the process. So we're evaluating what the options are, but I'm thinking that's why you don't see any more activity out there. It is primarily funded by the state of Connecticut. The funds are coming through the state, so that requires us to kind of go through them and our COG to kind of look at any decisions. So really, it's going to be brought to them.
But we're still going to have the festival at Hammerfield.
So I think the festival committee, as far as the last meeting, they still plan on having it down at Hammerfield because they feel that they've started heading in that direction. But also, I think they've expanded some of the activities because they have a
lot more space.
The Hammerfield will accommodate that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's that project. We've done a field study. So the first one we did was Walsh. Go ahead. So what's next? We have Walsh.
Yeah.
Which are stunning. Like, holy shit. I mean, I went over there the other day and you just don't realize how big it is.
Yeah, that's that should be listed under another major project.
It is a major, no question. Yeah. Okay.
So that is being completed. We expect that to be completed probably end June or beginning of July.
Okay.
I think that turned out to be a great project. I know there's a lot of people who feel we should have done it as part of the Walsh Intermediate School project. And I felt so too at first, but as we kind of go on through this and now I see what we're building out there, the reality is I think we're getting a much better project by doing it separate.
We're going to get this if you did
because we wouldn't have had the two fields. We wouldn't have had the all the amenities out there that we're going to have, the bathrooms and things like that, if it was part of the other project, because it was, so that's coming to complete. We're going to evaluate. We do have that full plan.
Yeah.
Now you probably won't see another full park renovation or expansion as we did with Walsh. I think how we're going to look at it now is try to kind of break it up among, identifying what the priorities are, and probably have improvements throughout town. So rather than just trying to undertake one single park, we may look at, what do we need to build next? What does the community need? I think what we built at Walsh will satisfy a lot of the demand that initiated us undertaking this field study, primarily with the two all-purpose fields. But I think now the way there's been a changeover in the rec department. We have Dale Izzo as our new director. I think with working with Dale and the board, we're going to probably look at some other projects to start moving forward.
And I think one thing that, and this, not necessarily you, but also with changes in superintendents, changes in certainly Alex was great with this, but Dale too. If we can get the Board of Ed and Parks and Rec to work together on scheduling, it might solve a lot of these problems too.
Yeah, and I think they were heading in that direction. I mean, I think as you know, there's been some changes through that department as well, and I think by and large we have the departments have a very good working relationship.
It seems it, yeah, much better now. And what else? So we have, and I know the schools are doing a study now where at some point they're going to want, I mean, they've got some major projects with, or it's just Sliney, or I think the Brantford High School roof is on their agenda too. So there's a couple major projects we have coming up, and that'll be for your successor to analyze and study. You know, one of the things that you did, the first press release you sent out when you took office was a press release stating that you were supporting Joe Mooney as the chair of the Board of Finance. Now, I think that was a message more to almost Republicans saying, listen, I'm leaving him there. Like, this isn't going to be controversial. I want him, and he's a Democrat, you're Republican. But politics has not really been a focus for you. And then very soon after that, you made the announcement that if you wanted to be on a board or commission, you didn't have to go through the Democratic or the Republican Party. You can go directly to the first selectman's office. Obviously, you were raised a Democrat, and you switched over. You know, politics is reality, but you've worked hard to try to remove as much of that as you can. What role has that played in getting things done?
Oh, it's been, I think, huge. I think on a number of not only just projects, but just various initiatives that we've undertaken. I mean, there's stuff that has come forward that, you know, I didn't, you know, they weren't a priority of mine taking office. There were things that probably, you know, weren't even part of the conversation. But, you know, working with you know, many people across our community, regardless of political affiliation, I think we've undertaken a number of initiatives, and that's really how, you know, if somebody has something that you know was for the benefit of the community, you know, I always ask, well, what's the public purpose of doing this, right? And if somebody has an idea or a program, an initiative, a project that, you know, and it'll benefit the community, that's, you know, it's something that I feel that the office of the first selectman should, you know, kind of help move that along. Yeah.
No matter who it comes from.
Right. It's not, you know, regardless of, you know, who it's coming from or, you know, the party affiliation.
And I'm proud to live here and I'm happy living here. One of the things that in covering politics in other towns, state and national, is that this kind of sits as this kind of representative town of, okay, devoting money to infrastructure actually does help keep the mill rate down. Mm-hmm. Devoting money to parks and schools and roads, putting that off costs more in the long run. Right. Avoiding politics actually helps getting things done. Now, the people who get involved in politics also do because they're a Democrat or Republican, but you have to actively work to be nonpartisan, because without that, it's going to get crazy partisan real fast. The people who are hyper-partisan get in there. But I look at Brantford as this example of a town that has successfully done what everybody talks about doing, but never succeeds at doing. And everything becomes partisan and everything becomes – and we've been able to do that. And we've been able to say we're going to spend – yes, oh my God, that building looks huge. I can't believe we spent all this money. But your mill rate is still lower than everybody else's. And we still have all this money saved. And we have all these options because we've done the things that – don't always, like people say, stop spending money, but spending the right money saves money long term. Right. And avoiding politics, avoiding political party nonsense helps us get more stuff done. And we have a better town for it. And I think that's something that is, you kind of change when you got in office. And I always describe you to people as not political at all. Like you don't really seem to care. I don't think I've ever had a significant conversation with you about Trump. Like it's not something that you're running to talk about. You care about the town. I think that's something that the town should be proud of. That said, you've already announced that you support Jeff Follett. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, I think
when I was contemplating whether to run again or not, you know, I do look at what we've accomplished over the years, and when I say we as a town, right? It's not just me. It's a team. It's the people that are involved and active. So, you know, I do think we're on you know, as far as the town keeping that, you know, that partisan out, just being nonpartisan, just really kind of focus on putting, you know, what's for the good of Brantford, putting that first, and is important. You know, I know, you know, Jeff, as we know, has served many years.
25 on the Board of Finance,
on the Board of Finance. which again I think is important because of what we started this conversation with, what it was being faced with, and I think Jeff will bring that, carry on that what I said about that culture of fiscal responsibility from the Board of Finance, and keep that in the office of the first selectman.
Yeah.
He's somebody who's beyond his dedication on the Board of Finance. He's somebody who has truly served the community. So I do think that's kind of ingrained in him. I don't think he's a partisan person.
Yeah.
I think he's Branford. He's just a Branford person. He wants to see our community thrive. So in contemplating it, and I've known that Jeff was interested at the right time. So I did talk to him prior to announcing that I was not going to run, just to confirm that he would run. And once he said he would, so once he formally announces, I said I will formally endorse him.
So you weren't fully there. It's Jeff Lett's fault that you're not running.
No.
Okay, that's good to know. All right.
Listen, I was, put it this way, had a strong sense that Jeff would run at some point, and if and Jeff has said this many times publicly and to me that he would, he's like, hey, when it's when I'm not going to run again, because I think we do have a mutual respect for one another.
He's a good guy.
I think he's a good, and again, all these great things that we've done as a town, I couldn't have done without the support of the Board of Finance, inclusive of Jeff Follett, right? So I think he appreciates what we've been able to do as a town moving forward. So when I made the decision I wasn't going to run, and I was pretty certain that he would step forward, but I did have to confirm before making that announcement that he would, and so I confirmed with him.
Okay.
And prior to making my announcement.
So what led to the announcement? What led to you deciding you didn't want to run again?
Steve, it's just I can't put a finger on one thing that made my decision or why I made my decision. It's just I think as when it's time, I still enjoy it. I feel I can still contribute. I feel like we were still accomplishing great things as a town. But just kind of reflecting, which I would at this time every 2 years.
Yeah.
I just felt it was time for me to kind of move on and put my focus on what I'm going to do for the next 20 years.
Yeah. All right. And there's other changes you made too. I mean, we have when you first started, the tax collector was an elected position, which nobody thought it should be elected. The town clerk was an elected position. That's no longer an elected position, which I think everybody kind of agrees with. So that's a big change that's happened, and remove that from the political process.
Yeah, I mean, we keep focusing. I think everything circles back to providing stability, right? And we talked about keeping Joe Mooney as chairman, right? I feel that a leader should bring stability to a situation, and maintain where, if it exists, maintain it. So I think having those two positions, because what they're involved in, we have an active tax collector and active, and a working town clerk. They're responsible to process things. They're responsible. There's a lot of statutory requirements, and I think to have stability within those offices, rather than having them at basically the whim of the election every 2 years, where it takes somebody 3 years to get certified. It takes them probably longer than that to fully understand all of what's required with the job. I thought those would be better off, which many had, I shared obviously because it ended up have those be appointed positions. So they're appointed by the Board of Selectmen for 4-year terms. This way you get a better sense of their qualifications and their experience to ensure that we're providing stability in those departments.
Well, I think you've done a good job. I should say thank you after the RTM on Thursday night passed a salary increase for the first selectman after you leave. You've never taken a raise in the 12 years you've been here. So I appreciate you leaving a couple $100,000 on the table. That's very nice of you. That probably paid for a little bit of a playground or something like that. But we did have to adjust that for the next guy because the
It was
price.
2015 the last. We just
You did the first year?
because the way the elected officials' salaries are, the increases or the salary is set is prior to them taking office. So when I took office, I took that first year, I got the increase that was set by the previous administration.
So you've never, in your budget,
but I've never
raised it.
yes,
Yeah.
and then I think I may have reduced it down to 5. But then yes, never had an increase. I thought it was important once I made the decision not to run to kind of reset where the salary would have been, and that's what we did.
Out of curiosity, would you change, if you could, Guilford's every 4 years for first selectman?
Yeah, I go back and forth on that. I do think, the office of the first selectman is is the CEO, and they're setting the vision of the town, right? They're kind of carrying that out. And I think to have the voters hold that individual accountable every 2 years, I think, unfortunately, I go back and forth because with that, to have it, when you get into the campaign, a campaign year, right? You often see some like silly things happen, right? But again, it's really for the individual who's in that position. If you have the right, the person in there, they should continue. Listen, I wasn't a strong campaign. I didn't focus on campaigns.
Clearly, you didn't like campaigning. I get that.
I focused. What I felt is if I continue to do the work and the job, that if the people want to keep me here, they'll vote to keep me here, and I thought it was more productive to kind of focus on what we were doing than campaign. Participating in campaign.
Yeah,
activity.
I get it.
So, all in all, I think the 2-year cycle for the role of the first selectman, I think, is probably the right cycle right now.
So what advice would you give we don't know, we talk about Jeff, we don't know if it's Jeff, but whoever becomes the next first selectman, your letter to them would say what? I would,
listen, whoever comes in that position, I would make myself available. That if they needed any, information, any background, even if they just wanted to bounce something off me or from what my experience was, I would certainly be there. But I would, just tell them the kind of same thing what I did. Just try to kind of do what's best for Branford. Don't get involved in the, don't introduce, the partisan, keep it nonpartisan. Work with everybody. And that's really what I think you need to focus on. You'll have success.
Are there any regrets? Anything you wish you would have gotten done? Not really.
No, I should have taken the raises. No.
Oh, you pressed your own button.
No. I just said that because you brought that up. But listen, I'm sure there's certain things that I wish I had done differently. There's always some projects. I mean, I have a whole list of things that I would still like to see forward, and even talking about them with town staff, whether it's engineering department, public works. There's, like I said, those small improvements that we've been doing around town. We have a lot of stuff that we like to do, and even large projects. I'd love to see that boardwalk along the Branford River.
Yeah, John Less is working on that and getting.
Well, we have it permitted, and we think we've identified. Well, I don't think we know we've identified a funding source.
Okay.
So we expect to put an application in.
Oh, no kidding! With the engineers or with the deep.
No, we have with the funding source.
Yeah.
No, it'll be the same program that we did the Main Street lot zip.
Really?
Yeah. So actually, I was in a meeting and they mentioned that one of the eligible uses is boardwalks. We confirmed with the state. We sent them our plans what we were looking to do. It opens up a lot of pedestrian access to the waterway. It kind of checks a lot of boxes. So. We hope to move forward with
The
that.
people who
soon.
don't know what that is by Monoese, under the Monoese Street Bridge.
Yeah, it's a boardwalk. It'll be an 8-foot wide boardwalk that'll connect essentially Indian Neck Avenue to Monoese. It kind of follows the
train tracks.
the river.
Yeah.
And I think it'll just be
I think it'd be
a
great.
beautiful asset.
Yeah.
That you kind of that connection to the Shoreline Greenway Trail, which was to the west, down Tabor and there, and then to the east, you can actually, as the Anchor Reef project that continues to finish up, but they've expanded that walkway along the river.
Yeah.
I think our river is a great asset in town. I think anything we could do.
I think what we're going to see, so the Maritoli Sachs project over Anchor Reef, they have a whole, what do you call it, pier there that they're redoing. And they're going to put a restaurant in the new building. So you're going to have a restaurant with a pier. It's going to be amazing. I mean, you can have some really, really amazing things happening along that. Well, not everybody will love that. Now that I think about Mr. Hartwell's war with the Stony Creek Brewery. But, and I hope the brewery, does okay. But it really, I think Brantford has become, I mean, it's amazing to see. We always talk about apartments coming in and people don't want apartments and they don't like it. But those are really people who come in and support the restaurants and the things to do and the breweries, and it's amazing to see. I mean, I love Friday night on the Green. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think when you go down around the Green, every evening I see people. As you know, a number of years ago we put the tables outside. I think that really has helped keep people down there. We've expanded that. Even we got some more now because we established some more gardens. Yeah. And the Green is just getting utilized more and more by people who are actually then, going to the restaurants and just staying in the center. It's great to see the activity.
No, I appreciate that that's been, the little things that you've done, adding Colin and things like theater and those types of events. So the added things on the Green. I mean, we went through some summers where every night there was something on the Green.
Yeah, we had, I think last year, we had 40 concerts through the rec department. I think 35 to 40 concerts. The concert series has started already, the Friday night. It's behind Town Hall.
They're doing the behind, yeah. It's almost a natural amphitheater there. That could be nice, yeah. But between that and the senior center, I know activities at the senior center are drastically increasing. There's just a lot of things to do in Brantford. One thing I say a lot, not just from the town, but also some like the things like the O&Ego. If you don't have money in Brantford, there's still plenty of things to do. Like this is a town that supports people going out and being outside and doing things. I live near Foot Park. Foot Park was an amazing acquisition. We didn't really talk about that, but and Alex in Public Works did a great job doing that. I'll give a little credit to Gary Zielinski, who you know well, who's done an amazing job with Public Works and what he's done around town. So I like living here. I'm glad you were the first selectman for the last 12 years. I hope Jeff or whoever it is follows in those footsteps, and I appreciate you coming on.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jamie.
All right.
Okay, that ends the podcast. There's nothing else to say. I will we'll record one next week and have that up live. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.